I've grown tired of slides, so I don't do slides anymore. I do this. So when I do a talk, I just write an outline for myself. If you were on the previous two sessions, excellent sessions by Jeff Fritz on the basics of how to do Blazor, and then Sam Basu did the Maui, which is sort of an extension that allows you to use that kind of technology for native apps. I'm going to show you not the basics of how to do Blazor, but actually a working application that I have built. I've been doing Blazor for well over 2 years for large clients. A lot of the work I do is internal only for large corporations. And of course, can't show you that. But this, what I'm going to show you today is a application that I built for a educational firm. They sell into the elementary and middle school marketplace, and it is designed to help people make their lesson plans better for their teaching. So it is called SEP, or Classroom Education Plan. So let's go see if we can figure out what SEP is by doing a little tour. Now remember, this is all written 99% in C#. So I'm going to log in as an administrator, and you will see that I have a left nav here, and it has the fancy little caret up here that I can show the full description, or you mouse over, you get the tooltip. And up at the top, you have a little banner. Then I use tabs a lot. So this is showing you some interesting HTML markup. There's another one, it shows graphs. This one is a bubble chart. And this one shows these little cards that show the progress of all the teachers and how they're doing. Now, you're working with education, so basically I have to build a roster. So these are districts, and a district might be, you know, something like the, let's see, the last one I did was Wissahickon. I love to say that. But you go to Wissahickon and it has schools, it has teachers, it has classes, it has students. And you'll notice that I use grids a lot. And the grids, the reason I use those is they are searchable. So you can do things like this, or you can clear that. And it makes it real easy for people to find information. They can also export this to Excel anytime they need to. The other thing it has, if you go in here, this is the list of all of the schools. And right now I have 181 of them, if you see on the lower right-hand corner. And we also have 570 teachers and 558 classes, and then 12,679 students. And this is all dummy data right now. I am in what's called the development environment. We have a demo environment, and then we have a production environment, but I'm not going to show you those. Now, sometimes what I do is, if you want to see a student, I put little buttons here so you can click and drill down. And if you look at the URL at the top, you can see that I passed the ID of that student in so I can see what they answered on their surveys. Some other fun things that it does here. I have a whole bunch of lookup tables. Let me see if I can find those. Nope, they're down here. So these are all my lookup tables. So if you want to know what the answers are, and you want to know the date types and, you know, frequency types, things like that. So I have that, so it's very easy for the user to edit. And these can be edited in inline, which is a feature of the Telerik grid set. And other things like here, if we wanted to edit a school, that actually pops up a modal dialog, and I can do my editing here, etc., etc. So why are we what are we trying to monitor here? And the basic thing is that we're monitoring progress made by teachers. So teachers do surveys and students do surveys, and they explain what it is that happens in their classroom, whether it's effective or not. So let me see if I can show you a little bit of that. So let's go to Wissahickon. And there we go. And we can go in here and we can say, well, they didn't do their student survey yet. I have to go back. All right, and I'm trying to remember which, was it Shady Grove? And they should have teacher surveys, and the surveys are taken 3 times a year. If I click on this button, it actually goes into the survey. And the survey is quite fancy, so let me show you what a survey actually looks like. And I'll show you at least a teacher survey. I don't have time to go into the student surveys, but those are equally as interesting. So here's one here. This is a survey that was not started yet, teacher survey. So what it does is it goes and finds the student list for the class. And again, this is all written in C# using markup for Blazor markup. And what you do is you go in here and you score these things, and you see on the left, I'm indicating which ones are finished. And let's say they didn't do well there, and they did okay there, so on and so forth. So that's basically how they fill in a survey. And then the survey results, I'm not going to finish this. The survey results, you can see over here, it has 20 done in the details. They get summarized. So if we would want to go and look at this teacher here, so this teacher is Bunch. So what I'm going to do here is look up the teacher's number, and you'll see teacher is 880, and then I'm going to go to what's called the teacher dashboard. And when I go to the teacher dashboard, it's going to show that particular teacher, and you can see that they have a workflow. They need to finish their end of and middle of year teacher surveys. It shows you a grid. It shows you a calendar of where things are due, when they're due. And then it takes the results from your surveys and it makes graphs, and it shows you interesting things like what your strengths and needs are in your class. It shows you what is called your student voice. These are things that you need to improve on, etc. So basically, this application keeps track of all this. And then this happens to be classroom 1037. So I built a tool for the people that manage this. And this shows a summary of what this teacher is doing. So it shows that they've completed certain parts of their yearly progress. The next thing they need to do is their middle of year teacher survey. And this also allows me to generate sample data for them. So I have fun things to do. So all this data is collected, compiled, and then it's reviewed by school principals, school district administrators, things like that. So that's basically what Classroom Education Plan is. So as I said, it's written entirely in C# and lots of SQL Server. So the next thing I'm going to show you is that this runs on AzureWebsites.net. Eventually, this will have a fancier domain name, but right now this is the developer account of Azure Websites, or of what's called Core Insights. So what I want to do is show you a little bit about how you would manage that in Azure. So right now I'm in the Azure Portal, portal.azure.com. And you'll see here that there are a bunch of assets that we use to run this application. So there is a database, SQL databases. There's a couple of them. There's a SQL server. So we pay money for the SQL server and then for each SQL database. One of the tricks I'm using is I use the same SQL server and then I apply multiple databases to it for each environment. It makes it much easier to copy data between them. And then I have an app service. The app service is basically your website. And it shows you here, there's a little bit of activity today because I started using it. And I can go in here and I can, analyze, look at my cost structure, do metrics, things like that. I can also link into AppInsights, and the AppInsights would give me very detailed log and metric information showing me how my application's running. All of this is contained inside a as I said, an app service. All these things are in one resource group, and that is what Azure uses to manage all this. But I'm not here to really teach you about Azure as much today. Let's go look at the database. So when I do the development work, I connect to it through SQL Management Studio. And it's exactly the same as you would connect to a database on premise. So right now I'm connecting to core-sep.database.windows.net, and you'll see up here that I have a demo, development, a pilot, and then a copy of dev for some backup work that I was doing. So I could go in here and I could do things and say, like, how many tables do I have? And I can tell you there's, this is your basic SQL play with integer identity columns. Has about 150 tables. I use a fair amount of stored procedures to make certain things automate. But that's basically how the application works. And then if I do queries here, you can see how fast they work. And I'm running this from my desktop, but all the database is in the cloud. So the performance is almost identical to what you would get if you were connected to like a data center server at your office. For the record, I'm doing this for a small startup company, but in my main job, I work as a consultant to Willis Towers Watson, and we are in the process of moving about 600 large websites to Azure. So I spend basically all day working in Azure, either in the app service, AppInsights, SQL Server, and then a little bit into the cognitive services, things like chatbots. So that's where my data is. And, the screen I have on the left, if you're interested, the screen I have on the left is very similar to this. So when I run this little store procedure, I get back a very, semi-complex data structure that shows the history of anything that a teacher did. And then I take that and I throw it into a grid and make it more readable for the end user. So that's basically where the data is. Now, where's the code to make all this happen? Well, the code, of course, is in Visual Studio. Now, yeah, you could do this in VS Code. You could do it in any editor you want, but basically, I have a lot to get done because this probably has maybe 40,000 lines of code in it. If you look over here, these are data structures. So I said that I was using this thing called Dapper ORM. I use that instead of Entity Framework. I just like it better because it's more SQL oriented. But for instance, the thing I have on the left here, this class inspector, if we wanted to look at the structure of this, you see this C# class matches the result of this SQL command, which is used to drive this data grid, which is provided by Telerik. And I do a lot of data annotations. Sometimes I do them for required. Sometimes I do them for format strings. And what's nice, if I define a format string in my data model, it appears automatically in the, see the column here? See where it has DD, So it's only showing you the day and the month. And if I were to go and edit that row, the exact same format string would then appear in my my data entry screen. So those are my data models. And the way you get Dapper to work is you add a NuGet package. So hopefully you guys know how to use NuGet packages. But I'm going to come over here and I'm going to look at my NuGet package. And you will see that I have Dapper and I have something called Dapper Contrib. And so Dapper is the basic ORM, the relational model mapper, and then Dapper Contrib provides insert, update, and delete helper methods for Dapper. And it is a very popular tool to use. Okay, so I take all this stuff and I build massive services in C#. So for instance, let's look for flow tool. There you go. So when I do a flow tool get, this is actually the code that runs. The thing that you see on the left, which is going after this stored procedure, the code looks like this. It says it's an async method. I do everything async to make the response for the user very quick. I return back lists. I'm turning a list of the type flow tool, which I just showed you a minute ago. I pass in a couple, parameters, and then I declare an I enumerable, and then I do a SQL statement, and it's pretty complicated. The SQL statement is exec flow tool class ID academic year, which is exactly the same thing I showed you right here. Okay. So when it runs that, it then awaits and it returns back the data. If it screws up, then I log to something called nLog. I'll show you that in a few minutes. And then I return the to-do list. It's that simple. If I want to actually have a button you click that actually does something, then instead of doing a query, I do an execute async. And in this case, I execute something like update a to-do and set it to complete, and I pass in the to-do ID. And the way you do that in Dapper is you create an execute async and you pass the query string, and then you pass an object that has fields in it that match whatever you want to map in the SQL statement. Okay, so that's basically how you set up sort of a data service. And I have two main services. I have SEP service, which is almost all my data access. And yes, it's probably a bad idea to have 15,000 lines of code in one service, but it works for me in what I'm doing. I'm the only developer, and I don't need to load a whole bunch of other service classes. I just have, a couple hundred methods inside here. And I think, I don't remember exactly, but I think there's something like 200-300 methods in this class file. I also have a mapper, and what the mapper does is it converts one data structure into another. So if I want to take what's called a district full and turn it into a district, I have to actually go and map the fields and tell it which fields I want to copy from one object into another. And there are NuGet packages you can download, like AutoMap, that makes this much easier. You don't have to write any code, but you might want to write your own mapper if you have to do things like set, times, Up here, I'm setting what the idea is and stuff. So I'm actually manipulating some of the data as I map it. So what does it mean to me to do a district full to a district? Let's take a look at that. So district is going to be this class, or this data model here. And you'll see here that it uses contrib extensions. So in Dapper, basically what you do is you go in and you say, well, here's a class in C# called district, but it maps to a table that is plural, districts. And I need to know what the key is in Dapper, so I specifically say, this is the key to that table. And then I tell it whether things are required. If I put a question mark in it, it means it's nullable, which in SQL Server means not null. And that's basically the record or the schema exactly for the SQL table. So if I'm going to write records to districts, I just create a district and then I make a method call to Dapper and it automatically saves the record. Now, what is a district full? I said I had to map between them. District full is actually used for populating my grids. So, and the difference here is that I do a bunch of joins in the query and I bring back some other things that would be of interest to the person, like the address, and I look up some other information that might be valuable. But I can't, using Dapper, I can't save the record directly using district full. I have to turn it into a district object, so that's why I map. So basically, I use then two main C# classes, one for mapping, one for retrieving data, and then doing inserts, updates, and deletes. In the world of Blazor, what you would do is you would go to your startup file and you would then add a service. And you would add the SEP service or the SEP mapper to the entire project. And you'll see I have some others here. I'm adding a clipboard service. I'm doing a resize listener. There's a couple services that I added. And this one is for sending emails, SendGrid. And then up here, this one is for doing role-based authentication with Windows Auth. So what does that look like on a page? Well, let's go look at the page that we're looking at here, which is the flow page, and show you how that is built. So that is called Class Inspect Flow. And you'll see at the top here, I'm injecting listener, but I'm not injecting the SEP service. What does that mean? Well, I need the SEP service because down below, I'm actually going to make some calls to the SEP service. See right here? I'm going to call the SEP service to go get me information. So there's basically a trick in the world of Blazor where you can have imports. So the imports Razor file automatically adds SEP service and SEP mapper to every Blazor component. So I don't have to specifically include them. So with that in mind, what's actually happening here? So you look at this, and this component here actually sits inside this set of tabs. And above the tab is a card, and the card sits inside a framework here. How does all that happen? Let's go look at the main layout. And again, all of this is what we would refer to as Blazor layout, Blazor markup. Okay, so this is the main layout that is going to be applied to the page. And this has in it, on the top, it has a nav bar. The nav bar has a Telerik button. Then it has some standard HTML. So it's a mix of Blazor components and HTML. And you see where this says Classroom Education Plan? That's this right here at the top banner. Okay. Then I'd use a lot of role-based authentication. So I say, if you're a core admin, you can see the button called test, but we don't want end users to see that. Then I do some other stuff down here, and I do something called a drawer. The drawer reads a bunch of objects from my C# code. See the drawer? It does this. It does districts, which is this thing here. It does schools, which is this thing here. And you can see the icon for schools is home. So I just happen to use the home icon for that. Okay. Now, so that's how you do the left nav and the top nav. You do this thing called main layout. Then in the middle of main layout, you're going to see something called, and I'll find it in a moment. Please be patient. It's been a while since I looked at this one. Am I on the right page? Yes, I am. Okay. I know it's up here somewhere. Oh, there you go. See the at body? So in the middle of all this Blazor stuff, I put an at body. So the at body is going to be the next level down. So that's going to be a page. And there's a page called class inspect. And class inspect is going to do this little card at the top here. So you see the little card, it's a Telerik card, and I'm throwing a bunch of data in there, like the district, and then I'm throwing in the school name, the grade level, and the teacher. Where did it get that data? Well, as soon as I load that component, it's passed a parameter. So look at the top of the URL. See the 1037? It sets that parameter to the ID. And then when the parameters are supplied, when the page loads, then it says, okay, call the SEP service and go get me the full class. And when it returns that full class, it automatically populates all this data up here. It's pretty simple. Then I do silly stuff here. See this list of strings? Watch what happens as I go across here. See on the top right-hand corner, it's throwing up, I like to do very descriptive URLs. So it's showing all the URLs, and this page here knows how to call the child component needed for each of these tabs. So this page is actually made up of the main layout, then the what I would call the index, or the thing that hosts the tabs, and then each of these tabs is again a separate Razor component. And it's very common to build things in Blazor that way out of little components. So let's go look at flow. Flow says it calls up class inspect flow, and it passes the ID. So it takes the ID here, it calls up this tab, and it calls class inspect flow, which is this Blazor component. And when it receives its ID, it sets the parameter. And then down here, it loads flow tool get. Flow tool get is exactly what I showed you 5 minutes ago. Whoops. It's this stored procedure running in the SEP service. And it returns back a list of flow tools. And that list of flow tools is then bound to a Telerik grid. And the grid can do some fancy stuff. I can change how many things I show, so it does automatic paging. It exports, it has columns, stuff like that. Then inside the grid, then I do some fancy programming here. I look at the data and I say, well, if this is a profile check and it's already been completed, then let the person uncomplete it. What does that mean? Well, if they click this button, see how it basically uncompleted it. And if you went to their to-dos, you would see their profile check is not completed. And if I click this button again, it does one of these things right in this code here. See the command button? And that will actually go and set the value. So you can toggle things on and off. And the reason I built this is they need to do a lot of demonstrations to school districts. So I built the tool that basically dummies up the entire data for a school or district. So you can walk the teachers and administrators through the value you would get out of the product. So each of the columns here has a column description. There is a setting where you can tell it to auto-generate columns, but I don't use that too much because you want to have a nice, rich look and feel. So you want to do things like this. See little check boxes? Well, you're going to display a checkbox by doing a span, and the span actually uses Bootstrap and built-in icons to display the little check mark. And basically, I'm checking to see whether has item, that's a column. I'm checking to see whether that column is true or false, and then I put the check mark there. So, it's a little tedious. There's a lot of copy and paste because I probably have, in this application, I probably have 150 grids. And I would say maybe 30 of them have checkboxes in them. But I just, you copy and paste each one as you set them up. So let's see. What else can you do fun with these grids? I can go in here and I can filter. I can do equal, greater than. I can do sorting. So if I want to sort by date, I can just click on this. I can drop this down and select a bunch of columns. So if I wanted to add like the order column to this, I could show that and it adds it to the right of the, oops, not to the right. It adds it to the left. So the Telerik grid is very, very flexible, very useful. Let's see. So basically, my whole world is, putting all the data in SQL Server, building queries that make sense, adding those queries to a C# service, using a data model to give it a C# type, and then in the actual components themselves, I make calls to the service to get the data, and then I basically marry that list and type to some component. And Telerik does so many wonderful components, I just use all theirs. And what you see on the screen is very fancy HTML, and there's hardly any HTML here. All of it is created either by my components or by the Telerik components. So that's a little bit of how I build things with Blazor. The other thing that I do a lot of charts. So I showed you earlier, this is class 1037. So I forget, oh, the teacher is 880. So if I go back here, I showed you this earlier. If we go over here, I take this data for this particular classroom and I make bar charts. And this is fancy here. on these bar charts, when you mouse over, I capture that mouse over event, and I read some extra data and throw it up into the screen here. I also do, they don't have an education plan on this one, but they do have on this one, they do have what's called a student voice. So all of these are just SQL queries and stored procedures that return back data that has a lot of math in it and calculations that take their survey results and put them into a meaningful fashion. So so let me show you 2 or 3 other sort of fancy things that I'm doing in Blazor. Hold on a sec. Hope everybody knows that the cat is now inside. All right, so I want to try and show you a student survey. And the student survey does some sort of fancy stuff that I can't do in C#. And the reason I want to show you this is it'll explain a little bit about JavaScript interop and how I use that. So if I go to a class and let's go to a class in Wissahickon, and I want to look for a student. Well, apparently I didn't set up any student surveys yet. Classes 10:15. Here you go. Okay. So here is a class that has a bunch of student surveys, and of course they're all finished, and that messes me up because I want to show you one that's not finished. So let's just give me a second here. There's just way too much data in this application to keep track of. I'm looking for a class where I can like mess around and show you and change something for you. 76. Yeah, 476 sounds good to me. All right, here we go. So I'm trying to remember if I did their, they have their end of year student surveys and they're not finished. Okay, so the teacher's name is Hazen. If I go to my classes and I search for Hazen, it finds that class, and then I can go to student surveys, and here's the end of the year student surveys. So now I'm going to show you my fancy student survey. And this is designed to run full screen for a student that is kindergarten through grade 6. So you have to do pretty basic stuff. And this over here, this is some programming test stuff since I'm an administrator. But what you'll see here is if you click on the little horns, it actually talks to you. I'm going to hit it. Okay. And then you do this. And then if you choose that, see it dinks and it goes to the next one, and it does, it sort of fades in and fades out. That's all CSS nonsense. And if I click the answer, then I go to the next one, click the answer. All right, so this is the experience you would see, and it's full screen. The buttons are really big because a lot of the kids would be taking this on like an iPad, like a touch screen. All right, so I'm going to go back here and show you where the code is for that. And this is certainly one of the most complicated things that I wrote for this application. But this is the student survey for the iPad. And what you'll see here, that almost this entire thing is HTML. I'm not using any Telerik tools for this. I'm just doing a lot of HTML and a lot of fancy CSS. You can see the class names. And if you're not familiar, all of this is Bootstrap. So Bootstrap means put a padding of 2, center the text, call button set, round the corners, make this a flex, make it a column flex, and then justify the content center and align it center. And what that does is that takes the little round buttons and the little horns where you click it to make the sound, and it puts them basically centered one on top of the other. So hopefully you love CSS and you can apply that to Blazor just as well as you would any other HTML nonsense. Okay, so when you click the buttons, see the on click here is a play direct, audio 3. And you go down here to the bottom and there'll be a thing here. Trying to remember where it is. Play direct. Okay. So what it does is it does an invoke async. And what I'm doing there is I'm calling some JavaScript. And to do that, I have to inject the IJS runtime into my Blazor component. And then I have to have the JavaScript that I want to interop with has to be somewhere on the page. So I put that in the main layout. And if you go to the bottom of the main layout page, you will see a bunch of things that have to do with sounds. So there's update timer. Darn it, where is it? Up above. Oh, that's right. I didn't put it in the main layout. I'll show you where else it goes. So when I showed you the way the components interact with each other, main layout actually sits inside of host.cshtml. So host.cshtml is a standard HTML page. It has a doc type, and it has a body, and then inside the body, it'll say something like, "This is where your stuff goes." I'm glad somebody closed their door. Okay, so in the host HTML, here is the play direct. So that is your basic JavaScript stuff. And basically, the only thing I'm using the JavaScript for is to make the sounds. That's it. I have one other thing that I think does it forces the page to open full screen. But in this entire application with 30, 40,000 lines of code, it basically has 50 lines of JavaScript. So that is basically how I build pages. Any thoughts, questions? Is anybody still out there? All right. Well, I can tell you're still out there. But basically, that's how I build the pages. We only have 9 minutes left, so let me show you 2 other areas of the application. One area is authentication. So when you log in here, you have to authenticate. And because this has, it's This doesn't have like personal information about students, like where they live or their phone numbers, but it does have student information. So I had to have this application tested by a third party, security risk. And we finally got it to pass. But basically what happens in your main layout, it does different things depending on whether or not you're authenticated. So what I do in the main layout is I declare something called an authentication state. And then when you initialize the component, you create an instance of auth state. And then you could do things like you can say, is the person authenticated? If they're not authenticated, then I want to redirect them immediately to the login page. I don't want them to see anything. And then behind the scenes, I have this thing called a user profile that stores extra information about a user, like which school district are they in? What role do they have? And it goes and builds up all this stuff so that a core administrator gets one menu, a district administrator gets another, a school district administrator gets a third menu, and then a teacher and a proctor, they get their own menus. So all of that is based on roles. The roles are all stored in SQL tables. The page, when you log out, the page you use to log in is actually not a Blazor page. It's technically a it's not an ASPX page. I'm drawing a blank here. It's the older way of doing this stuff. Let me just show you and you'll understand. So what Microsoft does, I'm using Microsoft Authentication, and they have this thing called areas, and the identity service makes pages here, and the login page is there. Yeah, so it's a CS HTML page, which we used to call a razor page. Basically this page here, which is standard, what do you call it? MVC, model, that's what I'm looking for, model view component. This is an old MVC page, and that's just the way Microsoft Authentication works. It builds all of this for you, and then you log in using this, and behind this there is some code, and if you were to look at the code, you can actually go in and add your own custom sort of authentication rules and messages. So I have made custom login and logout pages. I have a resend email page, and each of those, like if I wanted to resend my email, it would come up and it would show exactly what I have right here. Okay, now how do you make these pages? That's interesting. So what you would do is you would go here and say add new scaffolded item, and then you go to identity, and when you do that, it's going to come up and ask you what you want, and it can make like 20 or 30 different types of identity pages. So the bottom line there is that the authentication and role management is standard Microsoft model view component from like 5 years ago. And Blazor doesn't have its own for that. It just sort of has that as an outside wrapper. And then inside each of the pages, then I decide what to show based on what role you're in. So, for instance, if I were to show you, I think this page has some of it on here. See, this is one of the more complex pages. See, it shows like, depending on what role you're in, this is a Blazor component, and this will actually show you a different title based on what your role is. which is interesting. So that's basically how you work with authentication. And then the last thing that I'll dig into, I have extensive error logging on this, and I use a NuGet package. Let me go back to NuGet. And somewhere in here is going to be nLog. See this one, nLog extensions, nLog ASP.NET Core. And there's a couple add-ons you can do for logging. I just read around and I like what this one was doing, so I decided to use this one. And what nLog does, you basically add it as a NuGet package. Then in your startup program and your program, let me show you where those are. The program, I think, see the configure logging here. So when I build my application, normally it would just create a host builder and it would just like do this part here. Then what you do is you add this extra thing here that says what your logging level is and that you want to use nLog. Okay, and for that to happen, you have to have your using statement at the top. And then if you go to your startup.cs, I think logging is in here somewhere. No, apparently not. It's only done in the program. Then I go to SEP service, which is my backend data service. And if I go all the way to the top, oh, sorry, whoa. If I go all the way to the top here, I add logger to this by passing SEP service, the type SEP service into the iLogger. So now the logging is available throughout this service. And by injecting that, then anytime any of these try-catch blocks throw an error, then all I have to do is call iLogger and I can make a log entry. And then oftentimes I will throw the error instead of handling it right here. And the reason I do that is if this throws an error, then in my pages, which technically are Razor components, you'll notice that when I read data in my pages, I often, well, this is not a good example. I often do a try-catch block here. And if the backend data service throws the error, then I catch that in the page. And the reason I do that is I can then take the error and surface it inside the HTML so I can show it to the end user. Now, you may not want to do that for your end users. You may only want to do it for your administrators. So then I would wrap this in an authorized view component and it would hide it from, say, an end user like a school teacher, but it would show it to one of our support staff. And then they could say, hey, you know, this page threw an error and this is what it said. If I want to see the real text of the error, then I can go to SQL Server, because what nLog allows you to do, trying to find the nLog config file, what it allows you to do is create different listeners. So you can write to a file, you can write to the console, you can also write to a database. So I'm actually writing to all of these things. So when I'm debugging in Visual Studio on my development machine, I can see the error right in the console, but then I can see it on the screen. And finally, if I go to SQL Server, if I open my nLog example, then I could say like, you know, show me any instances of errors that I got recently, and it'll show me. See where the message method that is from my code I showed you just a moment ago. When I call my SEP service, see how it says method right there? That is actually what shows here. And then it actually takes the exception and throws it up here. So I use that to like track down insidious bugs and find problems and all. So anyways, that's the wonderful world of SEP. That's my wonderful world of Blazor, and you can see it runs reasonably fast for an application. So hopefully you enjoyed seeing a somewhat real-world view of Blazor in action. This wasn't just a demo with a counter incrementing by 1, but it's fascinating what you can do with this. For my main job, I create a lot of Blazor portals for internal views of data in inside large human resource websites. So like just yesterday, I was working on MasterCard's website, Amazon, university hospitals, which you use hospital chain. But that's what I use Blazor for internally. But I'm able to show you this one because this one is more for you know, it's for sale. They're trying to promote it. So hopefully you got something out of this. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, Bill. I think some questions in the chat. Can you take a look?
I should do that. You're right. I was so busy talking, I didn't even look. What does it say here? Okay. Looking forward to, okay. Grid looks familiar. Yep. Yeah. Oh, Sam. Very good. Which version of Telerik? Whatever they'll let me use. Technically, I try and keep the Telerik tools up to date. Right now, this application is fairly large. I did not migrate it to .NET 6 yet. I did do that with my Telerik application, Blazor applications that I use at my other client. I just haven't taken the time to update this. Yeah, so what you were looking at was .NET Core 5, and the Blazor, the Telerik tools were probably from 2 months ago. Let's see, how are you calling from client-side Blazor to server-side? Okay, SEP service runs in the server only. I forgot to mention this entire application is a server-side Blazor. I don't bother with the client side. It really wouldn't add value for what I'm doing here. The same is true of my big corporate applications. Most of them are server-side. Yes, the entire app that you saw through all this demonstration was all running off of Azure, and that's exactly the speed that the clients see. All right, I'm gonna have to call it quits here because we have to start up the next talks. I'm gonna end the recording. Hopefully